Hey, hi, my name's Chelsea Murray, and we are going to be discussing social issues having to do with technology.
And I'm Amanda Desmond.
And I'm Scott Kurtz.
So I'll start. I'm going to share my screen with you guys.
Okay.
Okay. So on the first topic, the cyberbullying topic, we all read the article using visual scenarios to educate, or I read the article, Cyberbullying Using Visual Scenarios to Educate and Raise Awareness. And the big things that I took from that were just the idea that there's so many digital means available for cyberbullying through social media, email, and texting. I took notes that the 45.6% of students that were surveyed were aware of it happening to someone else, but only 29.8% reported being victims. And I thought that was I thought it would be a little bit closer together. I don't know if that means fewer are reporting it. I also thought that it was interesting that 75.8% reported that they'd only experienced it fewer than 4 times, like it hadn't happened more than 4 times. Did any of you have anything related to that you wanted to talk about?
Let's see. I mean, I thought that they said that it was really interesting that they said that it was fewer than 4 times. Because when you hear about bullying incidents, you hear a lot about how like it's over and over again, or like how it ends up in someone retreating from school and changing schools. So it surprises me that it was less than 4 times compared to like the majority was less than 4 times compared to being the majority of more than 4 times.
Exactly. That's kind of how I felt. I felt like you hear a lot more about it, and that it seems like it happens to kids more and more than 4 times. So I thought that just kind of stuck with me.
Definitely.
The other big things that I noted was the differences between the high poverty school and the low poverty school, and that especially the fact that the high poverty school, it seemed like the researchers thought those students had maybe less knowledge about the reporting features and blocking people, which I think is another example of the digital divide, which we're going to also talk about today, and kind of related to that. And I also thought it was interesting that they reported to friends and not really to trusted adults. I did like the idea of using the virtual world to educate students, the thing that they created in part 3 of the study. And I really liked the idea that the student, I thought it was interesting that she said that it was a safe way and comfortable way for students to be taught about it and addressed, because then it's not as personal, having like the cartoon figures in the virtual world rather than real people, just to make it a little safer for them.
And in that case, I thought it was also interesting to think about how the male did versus the female, how the male was focused on how it wasn't really realistic in the sense of the virtuality of it, whereas the female was like, oh, the situation itself is very realistic. So I thought that was interesting how they both perceived it and what they took out of it,
Right. So then I went to find the other source, and I found an article from June 2015 titled "Social Media Cyberbullying Linked to Teen Depression." And like we've all heard, about suicide of teens that were bullied on social networks, and that's it's been reported in the news a lot lately, and that's kind of where this article looked at. And they know from past research that face-to-face bullying doubles the risk for depression as adults when these kids grow up, but the health and cyberbullying were not really well known. So these researchers looked into studies that had been done and reviewed them. And they reviewed 36 different studies that looked at cyberbullying and health and depression and those sorts of things. And they found something that was consistent through all of those, was that exposure to cyberbullying increased the likelihood of depression in the teens. And I mean, it could have been, they said, that the teens that were depressed may be more likely to be cyberbullied, but they kind of went against that because it seemed that every time it was reported that they were depressed, it was right after a cyberbullying incident. They didn't find a consistent link between being bullied and self-harm or anxiety. Some of the studies did, but others didn't, so they couldn't, say that all of them did. But it was interesting that just all of those studies that they looked at did find the link between depression and being cyberbullied.
Did you listen to,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interrupt, did you listen to the one podcast, I think it was on the two girls who were arrested for cyberbullying?
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting, what they brought up with that, and that the kids, like the girls, post on the social media and say, oh, forget about, I don't even care that she killed herself, I bullied her, I don't have anything to say more about that. I thought that was really interesting that they
Yeah, it was.
acted
I
that way.
agree. Yes. Ugh, it's scary, really.
Yeah.
The researcher in the article also noted that kids are not reporting it. They're fearful to tell their parents about it because they're afraid that then their parents will take away their internet access, which I can totally see. And it kind of spoke to me, this whole article kind of spoke to me on this topic as a parent and an educator, especially like as teachers. I think that we can educate students on what to do if they're being bullied online. I think we need to educate them to not be the bully and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And also, like, maybe even more importantly, is to be that safe person that they can come to if somebody does bully them online. If they're afraid to go to their parents, maybe we can kind of be the go-between in getting them help and making sure that they know what to do and to talk to the parents with them and that kind of thing.
And to go along with that, when we did that bullying course online, I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was really interesting, just to hear all of the like the myths and things associated with bullying, like especially what you were talking about, how there is an association between bullying and depression, but people automatically assume suicide has to do a lot with bullying, which I thought was interesting that they kind of debunked that and said that it's horrible to have that association that, oh, because someone was bullied, they committed suicide, when there could be a lot of other factors in there.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. The other topic, the digital divide topic. I read the article, the Pew Research Center article on African Americans and technology use.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, this article, or the data in the article, is saying that the digital divide still exists between African Americans and whites, especially in terms of broadband connections. I also noted in the data that the lower income households still show a large divide. And this article kind of brought me back to the cyberbullying article that I read, when the researchers found that the students at the high poverty school were not as aware of the use of social media technology in terms of like reporting or blocking things. And I think this totally relates to the digital divide, that these students are less likely to have internet access or the ability to use technology. They may not have parents that are able to understand it enough to teach them what needs to happen because they don't have the access and are not using it. And that whole divide is keeping them from being as knowledgeable about it. I think as educators, we need to be aware that the digital divide exists among our students. We need to be able to educate all of them on different technologies and provide ample opportunities for them to learn about new technology, and to remember that some of them may need more support because they don't have as much experience or may not use technology at home because of the digital divide that they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
I found a TED Talk for
Mm-hmm.
this digital divide thing, and I'll link the article and this TED Talk to you guys in like the discussion thing when I stop sharing my screen. But the TED Talk was addressing the digital divide between African Americans and whites, and Navarro Wright, is the speaker, and he addresses how perception of opportunities can help possibly with the problem that's going on. He tells his story and how he became who he is. He's a technology expert. He's worked for many companies and is, super smart and does all kinds of good stuff. But he makes excellent points, I think, in terms of widening the view of opportunity as something that we can do to make a difference for students, especially those living in urban settings.
Mm.
He gives an example. He had two friends growing up when he was a kid, one that could use a bottle cap scraped on the sidewalk to make a free phone call. And then he had another friend who was able to rewire like a cable box and receive free cable, and they could sit there and watch free cable. And he makes the comment that, he has no idea where these friends are today. He's made it to be this, very high up person that's kind of been very successful in his life. But these two friends who probably had just as equal abilities as he did, and they were able to think outside the box and do these things. He doesn't know where they are, and he blames that on the idea of their perception of world opportunity was too narrow, and it was never opened up to them that they could become, something great with this knowledge that they had and the abilities that they had. And this made me think, as an educator, we can widen the worldview for our students. We can show them all the opportunities that exist for them. He started what's called the Close the Divide project, and he provides outreach and is trying to give students a bigger perception of the world and opportunities that they could have. And I think as educators, we need to also work towards doing this for our students, especially those that are affected by the digital divide. We have the opportunity every day in our classrooms to give our students the ability, and I'll quote him, to see more to life than what's in front of them, and to be able to do that.
Wow. And that's really cool. Did you get the chance to watch the TED Talk that was listed as the child-driven education?
Yes.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, for some reason it came
That's
in
okay.
wrong. But I think that's really well related to that and what he talks about, and focusing on how even though those kids in lower countries might not have the opportunity, when you give them that opportunity, they can do many things with the internet. They can have a lot of more skills. They can learn a lot just by giving them that computer, putting that in front of them.
Right, and having the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. And my last slide are just the sources that I had. And like I said, I'll send you guys the links to the thing in our discussion thing as we're going along.
Okay, great. All right, so I can share mine next. I did a Google slide, so let me just screen share here. Okay, so let me find. Give me. Oops. Oh, there we go. So, obviously I read the cyberbullying article as well, and I just kind of broke it down based on what were the most important things that I took out of it, and a lot of them are similar to what Amanda said with hers. I thought it was really interesting how they set up the research, that the first part of the research was a survey, the second part was a focus group based on what they learned in the survey, and then both of those two were used to create the simulation. I thought that was a really interesting way to do it, and I think it was really smart of them to do it that way, because they're really gaining that understanding from the kids and using that information to create a simulation that would be realistic to them. That's not just kind of totally out there. I thought it was another point that was interesting was that, there was a lot of consent that has to go on in the background with parents. And I know they said that they had originally tried to poll 400 kids, and only 100 turned in those surveys with parental consent to publish them. So I'm wondering, what would have been in those other surveys? Would it have made a difference, or would it have been really similar to what they found? And I thought one point that was interesting was that cyberbullying was mainly using MySpace as well as cell phones. And that's really interesting for me because I grew up in a generation that used MySpace and was like, oh, we're so cool using that in middle school. So I thought it was really interesting to see how that connects to what the research they found, that a lot of the cyberbullying was on MySpace. And just like you pointed out, Amanda, I think it was really interesting to see the different reactions based on the school. Like, whereas the low poverty kids or the high poverty kids would be more aggressive with their reaction. They would say, oh, you get a bunch of people together to fight them, or you do fight them, or
Mhm.
you react in a strict way to intimidate them, whereas the other kids were like, I'd probably go talk to someone about it. But overall, I thought they brought up the point that the first thing the kids would do was try to ignore it, and then they would go to these separate ways, which I think was really interesting to see. And that when the kids who were at the high poverty school were forced to choose someone who they would go to besides a friend, they said a counselor. It wasn't right away, hey, I go to my parents. It was, hey, I'll go to a counselor rather than my parents. So I think that really shows a lot of differences in the schools as well. Um, and I think it's really important what they're doing is that they, one, not only show students how to be aware of the ways to handle the situation, how to handle a bullying situation. The two simulations, I believe, were one, someone being bullied via MySpace, and two, someone going to a counselor about a Facebook bullying. And I thought it was interesting that they showed the two different perspectives. Here's what you would do in a bullying scenario. Here's what you do, how to handle that specific scenario. I think that's really important for the kids to see, this is how you should go about this, because a lot of kids might not know that, or they might handle it improperly, so it's really good to educate them. As
Mhm.
well as with educators, we hear so much bullying going on, and especially cyberbullying, it's really hard for us to control. But, I, as a teacher, actually have an Instagram account, which allows me, I feel like, to be a little bit more on their social media side and getting them out that way. So if, I think if I could post stuff about cyberbullying, if I could do things with my teacher account to really promote how to handle those situations, even if it's just like, hey, it's anti-cyberbullying week, or this is an improper way to handle this, that would be a cool way
Mhm.
to do it.
I'll interrupt you for a second. My daughter had an incident on Instagram just recently. She's going into seventh grade, and she posted a picture on Instagram, and a girl that was supposed to be a friend, decided to say something like completely hateful, evil, mean. It was like I think two girls were having a sleepover, and they decided to kind of make fun of her on there, and she reacted. She did something she shouldn't have done too, because she reacted back. So, like, it was a good learning opportunity for her. And of course, they came back with something even worse. But it was a good opportunity for her, even though we've talked about not doing it. Like, I could sit down and say, see how your reaction caused them to make it even worse. And that's what they wanted. They wanted you to react. And we were able to block them and to delete it. And I showed her what to do and talked to her about what to do if it ever happens again and not to react that way. And I think we need to do that for our students as well. If they come to us with something, really talk to them about what to do in those situations.
Yeah, I think and that's a really good point you bring up, especially with your own kids, you need to do that. And I just remembered 2 years ago, I had this girl who was telling me about how her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend was posting pictures on Instagram of her and saying stuff and writing on her pictures, saying comments and stuff. And I wish at that point I kind of had known what to say to really be like, okay, this is how you should back away, or you need to talk to someone like a counselor about this, because this is not okay for someone to do, and how to really properly handle that. And at that time, I feel like I didn't exactly address it the way I should have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes to, just teachers knowing what to do, like in our last thing where we learned, just teachers being educated too on what to do and how to handle it is important.
Exactly. And like I said, I had listened to the cyberbullying podcast, and like I said, there was two girls who were 12 and 14 were arrested, and that blows my mind. I think it's good that they kind of did something about it, and showed them that this is a serious thing, because especially she committed suicide. She had been bullied for over a year based on her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend, and I think it was just so sad that the girl felt the need to post on Facebook that, yeah, I bullied her, and I don't care that she killed herself. Like, you can say whatever you want, and that she didn't realize her consequences of having bullied someone. She had apparently tried to fight her physically at first, and then her mom moved her away, moved her to a different school, but the bullying continued, and she, I think, jumped off. I think it was like either a farmhouse or something along those lines, and I just think that was just so incredibly sad
Mhm.
that happened.
Yeah.
Um, and then the op-ed that I read additionally was from Rolling Stone, and I have the link on here, but I can send it to you guys as well. And I think it's really relevant for what's going on right now in social media. I don't know if you guys know, but Taylor Swift, everything going on with her. Do you guys know about that?
I
I
do.
don't.
Okay. she Kanye West used her name in a song and used it inappropriately in a sense, and Taylor came out and said, I can't believe he used this. I never gave him the permission to call me that. And then Kim Kardashian decided to jump in and post on Snapchat a video of Taylor on the phone with Kanye West saying, "Oh yeah, use whatever you want." And
Mm.
so it's just been this whole media blow up, and this article was about why we let famous women get bullied online, which I think it's really interesting because it talked about how all these actresses, females like Chrissy Teigen and any famous singers, if they post something, there are millions of people who comment on it, and people will say things like, "How dare you do stuff like this?" or "You're a horrible person," or "You're ugly." And they don't really, the social media, with normal everyday people, they do sometimes step in and like say take down the account or take down whatever's going on, but with famous people they tend to avoid that, which is kind of sad in a sense because they're supposed to be so strong and these famous women, and they don't have to worry about it, but at the same time it's promoting, oh, it's okay to say those things to people. So I thought
Right.
that was really interesting.
And especially if you think about people like, kids looking up to them, and if it's okay for people to do that to them and nothing can be done about it, then what are we saying about it when kids do it to each other?
Yeah, exactly. So you see other people doing it, famous people, that's okay, but it's not okay to do it to other people in your age group.
Right.
So then mapping the digital divide, I thought there was a lot of interesting factors that go along with it, that there was a strong association with how much you use the internet based on your income and geography. And I like that they kind of split it up. At first they focused on income, and they split up and focused on geography, and they said, okay, well, you can see a strong association, but it's the most strong when you combine income and geography. So the higher your income, and the more in a city you are, city location, the more chance that that you use the internet. Um, I thought it was really interesting that all Americans can access the internet, that everybody has basic access to internet, but there's still millions out there who do not use the internet, and there has to be a lot of reasons behind it, and that's what they were really trying to figure out with this article. Um, and I think it was really interesting that with the population density, that the more people were in an area, the more chances you were to have um, a great number of different services to get, as well as lower costs. Because if you think about it, at first when I was reading, I didn't understand, well, why are rural communities less likely to have internet? But then it makes more sense as you go on and they talk about population density. There's going to be more services, more places for Comcast to go, and the prices are going to be lower compared to when you're out in a rural area where there's not as many customers and they have to make the prices higher in order to get by. Um, and another interesting, obviously, age was a big factor in that, but they stated that with age, if you have a higher income, even though if you're older, you're more likely to use the internet. But if you have a lower income and you're older, you're less likely to have it. So there's still that income factor there. They mentioned with education, if you didn't graduate high school, you were less likely to use internet than compared to, like, I think it was like 40% compared to 90% of college graduates use the internet. So it was a lot of big numbers there, and it really shows a lot of the associations. And I think it really showed the importance of needing to increase the availability to everybody everywhere and trying to make prices similar in all areas, because, who's to say that people out in rural communities can't have internet, but if you live in a busy city area where you're more likely to have a small cramped apartment, you can of course have as much internet as you want for a lower price. So, and I think it's important for us to think about as educators, because we need to think, okay, well, we're in Salisbury or surrounding areas, so there might be certain areas that don't have as much opportunity with internet, whereas compared to maybe living in the center of Salisbury, they do have more opportunities. So we have to again think about that as we are, having assigning kids homework that might be on the internet or assigning them research. And my last, two last things is the child-driven education TED Talk. I thought that was really interesting because it was Sugata Mitra, I think. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but he placed the computers and internet in places where there were no children who knew what internet was, and he kind of just like put it. I know he one time put it in a wall that was 3 feet high, and he just left. And they like come back a month later, 2 months later, and the kids have already figured out how to download music, how to play music, and record it back, and they really captured the kids' interest. And he, I know at one point went into a school and he gave them a computer and he said, here is, I think it was like biomechanics, I believe it was, and it was all in English. And this was a country and kids who didn't speak one lick of English. And he walked away and said, figured it out, try, and left them basically for 2 months. And he came back, he said, okay, well, tell me what you learned. And all of the kids were like, well, we didn't learn much, And then they started talking about how, like, they figured out, I can't remember the exact line, I wish I'd written it down, but about, like, the nucleus of the cell, blah, 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 all this
Yeah.
stuff.
Wasn't that amazing? It was like they really had learned a lot, but they didn't think they learned anything. Yeah.
I know, and it's crazy that a lot of these places, they don't study English, and then they talked about how, like, after a year, the kids were learning how to Google in English their homework, like, and it really just shows you that even, one, the kids need the opportunity, and two, if you give them the chance and just say, here, work with it, they'll figure it out because they'll be engaged themselves. And especially that study where they did it in Italy, and he said he spoke no Italian, they spoke no English, and he wrote a question on the board, and they were supposed to figure it out, and they eventually did, and they were engaged with it because they were like, well, what does this mean? Let's figure it out. And so it really shows how we need to focus on getting the kids to do something that they're engaged in and to really put emphasis on that and that they can achieve it if they are really engaged within it and they have the ability to with the computers. You don't need to necessarily teach major skills that if you give them time, they'll figure it out.
Right.
I think that's about it for that one. And then the last thing I did was look at an article on Comcast was working with HUD. So HUD is the U.S. Department's House of and Urban Developments program. And basically what Comcast has done for the past few years, they've been trying to kind of decrease the digital divide. And they have decided that they are going to work with the public housing and those living in that assistance area and give them the ability to apply for Internet Essentials, which is just kind of the basic package of Internet. And that was about 2 million homes, which is really crazy to think about when, with the other article we stated that millions of people did not have Internet or did not use the Internet. Well, there's 2 million of them that might be able to. And I think it's important that it was for low-income families that they first started out with just giving it to those who have free lunch, then they eventually given it out to those who had reduced, and now they're even expanding it further to give even more people opportunities because not everybody who has low income and can't purchase the internet will have free or reduced lunch. So I think it's really cool that Comcast itself is working to get the same internet speed for those kids that they have at school at home, so they have all those abilities to use that.
Do you remember where that was? Is that, Comcast around the U.S. or is that like a city or?
I'm looking at the link right now. Right now. I don't know, Morris Herald News. I believe it would be a city.
Okay.
But let me get back to you. And,
okay. I just thought it would be interesting if they were doing it locally, to be able to see if that's something that we could share with students or parents somehow through the schools, to get them more access.
Right. I'll look up where Herald News is.
Okay.
Okay. And stop screen sharing. And Scott, you can go right ahead then.
All right, thank you. I don't have a visual, so you're going to be stuck looking at me. I apologize. Um, but I'll just feel free to chime in at any time. I'm just going to kind of go through my thoughts and what I took from this. I'm going to start actually at the end of where my research took me, and that was my own individual research. I found a journal through Salisbury's online library source about cyberbullying, and it really put into context. I mean, bullying's been around forever, but the idea of cyberbullying is more of a maybe about 10, 12, 15 years ago, it became a thing. And the article was about a middle school girl, and I'm sure this will probably sound familiar, whose mother created a fake account and began attacking the girl that was fighting with her daughter, and the girl ended up committing suicide.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
I remember hearing that.
yeah, it was in Missouri, and at the time, the Missouri state law did not have anything written in terms of in the legal books for online harassment. Harassment was a verbal or physical altercation. The way it was written, there was nothing including online or digital harassment. So this mother was unpunished, and it from that moment on, it changed the way um, everyone in our country and probably in the world had to look at this idea of cyberbullying. So as we looked at other articles like the girls in Florida, that's sort of like where it started as, well, how do we deal with this? And it's nice to know that it's now being taken very seriously as we deal with children every day, that they're not going to be able to do those kinds of things and hurt people even digitally like the girls in Florida did. Um, I also found it to be the other article was very interesting about the long-term psychiatric effects of the bullied and the bulliers. And I don't know if you guys read that one or not, but it was bullying and the psychiatric illness link. Some of the stuff I wrote down, victims and perpetrators are more likely to have psychiatric disorders as adults. Victims are 4 times more likely to develop panic disorders when they're older. And this one was the one that really surprised me, with that perpetrators are 14 times more likely to develop panic disorders. Boys are 18 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts than girls. It really just kind of made me think about the mental mindset of, I deal with 12 and 13-year-olds. You guys are in kind of high school, middle school. The effect of that moment, in the moment of I'm going to bully that person, or I can't believe I'm being attacked. The long-term effects that must have whenever someone can say to themselves, I'm going to attack this person, I'm going to consistently attack this person. I'm sure there's long-term effects that stem back to their upbringing and the way they're being raised and things they're allowed to see or do. But to see those long-term effects that it has really puts the importance of our jobs into perspective. And knowing that legally now it's a crime, and that's a step in the right direction, but we're sort of that frontline defense against. And we can't just pass the buck to administration. We can't pass it to guidance counselors, which I think happens a lot of times. That face-to-face conflict of knowing I'm the adult and I need to step in and I need to take a role in this situation is sometimes not the easy thing to do, because it's a conflict, and a lot of people are afraid of conflict. But that statistic there really was shocking to me, that adults would have carried that so far into their future, and it would have that big of an effect. Now to the main article of the research. I found it interesting that there were seven types of cyberbullying. Flaming, which was angry, vulgar messages; harassment, denigration, posting harmful and untrue information; cyber stalking, impersonating, outing, and exclusion. I was at summer school last week of 35 middle in the gym playing dodgeball for recess, and I got my whistle, and I was thinking about this article as I looked at them, and I was finding those kids that were being excluded. And in my mind, I really started to look at things differently after thinking about this research. about how those kids must feel in today's society, because I didn't come up through the whole digital world. It was a different for me. It was all face to face. You said something about somebody, they had to confront you, or it never happened. But I was looking at it through a different lens after reading about them. And I'm going to have the privilege of teaching a deaf student this upcoming school year, which is going to be new. And he was in summer school, so I really started thinking about him and wondering about these types of will exclusion be an issue I'm going to have to deal with him, and I'm sure it will be at some point. But knowing, I guess, is half the battle. Knowing this information, and now it's kind of, what do we do with it? Um, it made sense. I had never thought about it, but it made sense that boys are more likely to have bullying be a face-to-face thing and a physical thing, and for girls, for it to be more of the rumors and the online sort of ganging up kind of thing. And again, for me, as they got through the focus group questions, that's when a lot of things sort of became clear to me. Also, I was talking to a teacher of mine as we were watching dodgeball play out. At my school, we have high poverty and low poverty students, and I really started to think about the way in which they deal with cyberbullying and just bullying in general really made sense when you think about the lower income kids and the fact that they're more sort of like in your face, more willing to sort of get their friends with them and see who has their back, and it becomes more of it's a way of just reacting. And it really made sense that my kids sitting at home bullying each other on Xbox are probably not coming from poverty families, and they're going to turn to mom or dad or go to a counselor so that it'll stop. But the kids of lower poverty don't really know who to turn to, so they turn to their friends. Who's going to have my back? And I don't know if Chelsea or Amanda said earlier, but that fear of losing that thing you have, that's a poverty thing. If you have a phone and you know you're using it to cyberbully somebody, you're not going to tell an adult because you're afraid you're going to lose that thing that makes you happy in that moment. So knowing, again, that I'm going to be teaching kids of both of those spectrums, it really helps me think about how to deal with those situations, which ones need to be passed to the guidance counselors immediately, and which ones I need to have, we got to talk about this now, and we have to handle this differently. Yeah. You can't gather your girls at the locker because this happened. We need to go and talk to some adults, and we need to handle this in an appropriate way. So it was a very eye-opening day for me, reading all of this about cyberbullying.
Yeah.
Digital divide. As a geography teacher, I went with the Mapping the Digital Divide article. And I actually quizzed my son at dinner. I said, what 4 areas do you think there is a divide digitally? And he's going to be a sophomore, so he's in high school. He's kind of in touch with technology. And it didn't take him long. It took him less than a minute to come up, and they were the first 4 answers he said. He said, well, grandma doesn't use the email or the computer, and I do. So I know age is an issue. He figured out racial. You have a lot of minorities in poverty, and that's going to be a divide. The affordability, socioeconomic status, and I'll come back to that, but that's definitely going to be an issue he knew. And then where you're living, rural versus urban. For me, it brings up a sort of political discussion of the idea of socialism. And we were all in the same class, and we learned that socialism is a scary word, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And that was last summer. But when you say it's in everyone's best interest to have running water in their house, or you say it's in everyone's best interest to have electricity, well, if we know it's in everyone's best interest in terms of their future and their future success, that they have to be digitally connected, then it needs to be something that's ran to everyone's house, and at least they have the ability or the access to have it. Then it becomes the affordability, which we learned about in India. They have the program where there's government subsidies. So they're taking tax dollars they are in turn saying, all right, it is in our young people's best interest for us to take these monies, these tax dollars, and put it towards technology so our kids can be ahead when it comes time for high school and college. And that's a political decision. And whether or not we read Bill Clinton was trying to close the racial digital divide all the way back in 2000, it's now 2016. This
And that's
sounds
still
like it's a new. Pardon?
and that still exists. The whole,
Yeah,
it's still here,
yeah,
even though he was fighting it back then.
exactly. It was like it seems like it's a new idea, but that's it. Really quickly clarified. This has been ongoing for 20 plus
Yeah.
years that we're trying to close these gaps. Um, so, in an election year, this probably isn't the year it will get done. Because if someone wants to bring up a socialist idea or program, this is probably not the right time to do it. But when you talk about privilege and growing up with access to things, I lived in the suburbs of a small town, and I had family that lived in the mountains. And I remember when we first got the internet. And I remember the mountain families weren't going to get the internet because the cable company wasn't going to run the lines for 2 or 3 more years because it was a cost thing. Um, we have that going on in our nation all over the place, and it's very evident in those 4 categories: age, race, socioeconomic, rural, and urban. Um, the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about was again going back to the TED Talk with Sugata Mitra. I'm sure I butchered that name as well. Um, that was awesome, and I think the thing that clicked for me was the idea of the grandmas. I love the
Yeah.
idea that he hired the grandmas because I said to myself, this is really what we need more of. And I think about my classroom and I think about I'm standing in front of them and I'm saying stuff, but then there'll be an educational assistant, and they're not always older women, but we have a couple that are. And I always think the kids always turn to them and look for them and they want to show them what they're doing because they fit that role, that sitting back, admiring, and just applauding and saying, "Wow, good job." There needs to be more of that in education, and it's hard because we're such a standard driven, test driven. We all sit in the meetings. We're going to be sitting in them in about a month or so, where we're going to be told, here's where we were, here's where we need to be. And the idea of sitting back and just saying explore and I will applaud and smile and hug you is going to be a very difficult thing to justify to our administrators, but maybe we can still find time on our own to do that when they're not looking.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. 'Cause I thought that was really interesting to just hear like how he said, oh, they increased once we had these grandmothers just sit there and say, "Oh, this is great. You're doing well. Tell me more about this." Because I think a lot of the time we're saying, "Oh, this is right or this is incorrect. You need to tell me why it's wrong."
Hmm.
But I think we also sometimes need to take a step back and be like, okay, well, why do you think it's great? Like, tell me more about what you found out about this, because that way it's making them think, oh, okay, this is what I did, and I want to show her what I thought and why I did this and make myself feel good because she obviously likes it and is interested.
Yeah. And the final thought I'm going to say is I hate to go back to a political discussion, but in my county, they rolled out their one-to-one program starting last year, and I sat in a meeting with my son because he was a freshman, and that's where they started. They started with the freshman class, and each year the new freshman class is going to get these laptops, and the superintendent presented this video of 20 minutes of him talking, and one of the issues that came up was we can give a kid a device at school, but what happens when they go home? And somebody asked, well, what happens for the families that don't have Wi-Fi, don't have internet at home? And one of the assistant superintendents said, well, the county is looking into purchasing some hotspot Wi-Fis for those families in need. And the immediate auditorium reaction was very telling because people began to turn and look at each other, and you could see that privileged mindset of, oh, why do I have to pay for that family's internet? Why can't they pay for their own internet? That's going to be a hurdle that as not only a small town but as a nation, if this is going to be something that we try to close, this gap has to be closed, then people have got to get out of their own
World.
Yeah, exactly. Betterment of all versus betterment
Yeah.
of me. I guess I don't know.
Well, they have to understand that not everybody has equal opportunity and to
Yeah,
see that difference.
yeah. You can't sit back and say, why can't that person go find a job when society has hindered their ability to be prepared for
Right.
that job. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Those were my thoughts.
There's some good thoughts.
Sorry
Yeah.
you had to look at this the whole time.
All
Any
right.
final thoughts from anybody?
No, I think it was just really interesting, I guess, to see cyberbullying, and to hear about the digital divide, and to hear all those different perspectives and what happens.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right.
All right.